Well, as John Bongioni said, it's gotten complicated. Maybe almost too complicated. And what am I talking about? I mean, you could be talking about life in this crazy post pandemic COVID world. Dating is strange. We don't even know what to call people anymore. Now, I'm not talking about all that. I'm talking about toys and the link between how complicated toys have gotten and the prices that we're paying for them. I mean, toys used to be simple, right? When we were young in the 70s and 80s, nowadays it's like, I mean, everything is more complicated, but just picking up a figure and realizing how much more articulation, deco, detail that toys have now versus what they had in the 80s is mind blowing. And I mean, you can absolutely trace the historical cause of all this from things like McFarlane toys to Marvel Legends, but you really don't have to go that far back to see much simpler toys on the shelf. Now, in today's modern go world, thanks to in part the adult collector and the expectations that we put on getting sort of high end, highly articulated figures, that itself has acted as kind of a wave that has pushed the entire toy industry towards more expensive, more complicated toy product. And honestly, looking back at the last 20 years, I think this is a bit of an issue, especially for play. This used to be a perfectly acceptable Spider Man toy for a child. Had a whirling web hand action and, basic articulation. Nowadays, yes, you might say this is an adult collector toy, but the majority are sold to kids. And that's kind of part of the issue is we're all talking about how expensive toy product has gotten. Yet at the same time, we're demanding more articulation, more authenticity, better paint ops, and especially more, well, I guess, choice, more selection, not just your basic figures. Now, there are simplistic versions of characters out there, and there's been pushback from collectors saying, well, it's too simple. But this is product that really should be in the hands of kids. And while it's simple, it's kind of losing a lot of its play value. Simple toys back 30 years ago had a lot more intrinsic play to them. Now, product that's aimed at kids tends to be a sort of almost cost reduced version of an adult collector product where you still have to have authentic details, accurate paint apps, etc., etc. There's this general push that's come from, call it the adult collecting community, to make toys more and more premium. And nowhere can you see this more than in kid product. Product that in no way is designed to be aimed at the adult collector, is meant to be played with, but is just light years more complicated from a design and functionality standpoint than the toys that were produced in the 70s and 80s. So, yeah, you get lots of bright colors, less articulation than you might have in what would be thought of as an adult collector product. But look at that compared to a direct reflection of a 1970s toy. These were the pin mates that Entertainment Earth put out a few years ago that I got the privilege of working on. Probably the simplest toy of Spider Man you could find. They were based on those old 1970s Fisher Price figures. And this is a great example of how simplistic toys used to be. Literally, the body was a peg, no arms, no legs. It was designed to fit into a socket that would be in a vehicle or a swing or, et cetera, a tractor. And the toys were made to last back then. It was the simplicity. They weren't complicated. They didn't require assembly. That was a big part of the price point. And what's driving toy price points up is toys today have so many more pieces that have to get put together. Back in the day, yes, and they did evolve. Obviously, once licensed products started coming into the line and more deco is needed, but it's still light years away from where this same line, Little People, is today. Today, Little People has evolved to be fully formed versions of little people, of little humans, with all of the deco needed to recognize everything from facial details to details on clothing, and licensed versions for adult collectors have popped up, which I'm always very pro anytime you can take a form factor and apply it to more of an adult, collectible scale to give adults a new way to collect and ideally transition that brand to children. But even the kid toys, today's Little People, are so much more complicated than they were 30 years ago. It's kind of like how the farther along you go in a video game, the more complicated the dungeons and the monsters get at the end of each labyrinth. We see this in all sorts of entertainment. Movies, when they first came out in the, the tweens and 20s, very simple. Nowadays, movies a lot more complicated, not just in terms of special effects, but in terms of plot. Same thing with books. Books used to be much simpler. It was, clear character. Nowadays, books have a lot more subtext and are a lot more complicated than they were. Everything in society evolves. And honestly, in the last 30 years, a big reason for this has been the called, MTV generation and the MTV effect on content, where things are happening so much quicker and faster. Edits are happening lightning speed. And, well, it's, changed the way we take in content. Just look at the original Star Wars trailer from 1976-77 and compare that to a current trailer for The Mandalorian, and you'll see a perfect example of how much quicker editing and content have become. And now we're seeing this bleed over into playthings. Children are children. We've always, the kids haven't changed, but even the way a child sees the world, which is very different from how an adult does, has sped up. And again, I think coming out of the 80s and the push to own so much, material goods that came from that has changed the way kids grow up, but they still want simple play product because it's using it in order to understand a complicated world. So complicated toys are not the answer for kids. Simple toys are. Kids need simple toys, but the constant push from content, from media, and even from adult collectors wanting more articulation, more deco, etc., have all been contributing factors that have made toys more and more complicated over the years. And as a direct result, that's why we're seeing toys become more expensive. Even when you try less expensive versions for kids with little or no articulation, it still stumbles because kids today have been so sped up by MTV-inspired content, shall we call it, and the push from collectors to have more and more details, deco, that we're losing that play value that toys need to provide for kids. And I think there's going to be kind of a big pushback in the next few years, especially coming out of this whole COVID post situation, where the need for more simplistic representations of characters and more simplistic play is going to start pushing back, especially in the toy aisle, from more expensive, more complicated figures. Obviously, kids are the main end user of toys. It just remains to be seen who are the gatekeepers, and are they going to allow the frustration of expensive toys or the need for constant open-ended play to allow them to look at alternative choices that might actually encourage play. I hope this video was insightful and a look at why toys are getting more expensive and what factors have led to that. If you like this video, please do share it with others. It's the best way to show support for this channel, and I appreciate it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.